Hello everybody, I'm Suzannah Young. I'm pleased to be here with Corine Meier, who is a Tenancy Sustainment Advisor at Gloucester City Homes and a volunteer at Settled, which is a charity that gives immigration advice to EU citizens living in the UK. Corine and Settled have recently helped us by writing a very informative and instructive briefing on the EU settlement scheme. So Corine is going to be talking to us about the EU settlement scheme and what it means for housing associations and their staff and residents. So hi Corine, and can you please start by telling us about Settled and your role there, and tell us about your tenancy sustainment role at GCH.
Settled is a new charity that was set up a little over a year ago to help vulnerable EU, EE and Swiss citizens apply for the EU settlement scheme. We have about 100 volunteers spread across the country, and we also have a small central team. Due to the pandemic, we've had to move to online services mainly, so we have about 9 helpline in different languages, as well as small Facebook fora. I am a French speaker and a French and Swiss citizen, so I help Settled communicate with these particular communities. We are running, for instance, an online session with the French General Consulate in London for French citizens. I'm also a mother. I'm an army wife. I live in Gloucester, so I try and connect all my networks to Settle to make sure that any vulnerable residents within them get signposted to get help to the EU settlement scheme. As I've got quite a background in social housing, I've worked for 15 years in the sector, it seemed only logical to engage with housing associations to make sure that they're aware of the scheme and can help their tenants and employees. I work for Gloucester City Homes as a Tenancy Sustainment Advisor, and with my colleagues we ensure that our tenants receive the right benefits and that they get help if they get into arrears or have budgeting difficulties. We are also registered with the Office of Immigration Services Commissioner, the OISC, to make sure that we can provide advice to our EU citizens. And we work closely with our income officer colleagues to make sure that our tenants receive all the help and support that they need, in particular in these challenging times, and also that GCH arrears don't increase, and in fact, they've decreased recently.
Okay, thank you. And so what is the EU settlement scheme?
The EU settlement scheme is the process for obtaining a new immigration status for those EU, EEA and Swiss citizens and their non-EU or EU citizen family members who've been living in the UK before the 31st of December 2020, 11 p.m. The deadline for application is the 30th of June 2021, but we recommend that people apply before then, simply because you might need more help or more time to make sure that your documents are up to date, or in case you've got any issues with your application. The application is free and online only, and the status that you get is online as well. There's only EEA citizen family members of an EU citizen who get physical proof of their status. The application process that checks identity, criminality, and residence. And in order to get settled status, you need to have been living continuously in the UK for 5 years or more. That gives you settled status or indefinite leave to remain. If you have been living in the UK for less than 5 years continuously, then you are granted usually pre-settled status or limited leave to remain. If you are granted pre-settled status, then you will need to reapply for settled status once your pre-settled status expires after 5 years, or when you have been in the UK for 5 continuous years. Settled status gives you the same right as a British citizen to rent, to work, to access the NHS, or to access benefits. Pre-settled status gives you the right to work, to rent, to access the NHS, but it is not a right to reside for benefit purposes. So in order to access benefits, You will need to have exercised EU treaty rights by being a qualified person in the UK, so a worker, a self-employed person, somebody who has retained worker status from having just lost their job or having been sick after having worked, or the family member of either of them. It's a complex area of benefits, and I would recommend you check the Citizen Advice website or the CIH Housing Rights website. Non-application to the scheme could have a dramatic impact on the person and their family, because they would be considered as unlawful citizen resident in the UK come 1st of July 2021. And despite COVID-19, the Home Office has ruled out an extension to the scheme, even though scanning centres, for instance, have been closed and consulates were closed for quite a few months of this year. Providing advice to the EU settlement scheme is immigration advice. You need to be registered with the OISC, for instance. If you're not, then you can just provide general advice, or information rather, and signpost people to get help to the scheme.
And why do housing associations need to know about the scheme, and why is it important that they help their staff and their residents to apply to it?
The English Housing Survey 2017-2018 suggests that there are 4% of all social housing tenants who come from the EU. We also know that a lot of EU citizens will be working in support roles, such as in sheltered schemes and supported housing accommodations. So it's likely that a lot of EU citizens will be either housing associations tenants or housing association employees. It makes sense, if we know what an impact an application will have on the person and their family, that housing associations are aware of the scheme and that they signpost their employees and tenants to any help for it. We also know that the scheme will have an impact on housing associations' letting processes as well as their employment processes. Housing associations can continue to accept valid ID cards and passports from EU citizens until the 30th of June 2021, and current right to rent guidance will continue to apply. So housing associations will need to continue to carry out right to rent checks, especially for those tenancies that they are allocated on their own criteria and that are not local authorities nominations, for instance. Employers and landlords do not need to carry out retrospective checks for EU citizens and who are their tenants or their employees. And it is unlawful until the 1st of July 2021 to request to see sight of someone's EU settlement scheme. From the 1st of January 2021, there will be a new point-based immigration system, and it will apply for all those EU, EEA and Swiss citizens who have been in the UK after the transition periods, after the 31st of December 2021, 11:01 p.m.
Can you give us some examples of how housing associations have been helping their staff and residents to secure their rights under the scheme?
Certainly. So as an employee, I needed to apply. I didn't have the right phone. I didn't want to send my documents to the Home Office. I was worried they would get lost. I didn't want to drive miles to the nearest scanning centre. So I asked my employer if I could download the app on my work phone. GCH were happy for me to do so. So I was able to apply using my work phone. And later on, when I got my status, I was a little bit concerned that it was online only, and I wanted to trial it to make sure that it worked. So I asked my HR department if they wanted to trial it with me, and they did, and that was a big relief. In terms of working with our tenants and ensuring that they know how the scheme works, I've been calling them just to let them know of the scheme. And the way I actually got acquainted with Settled was when after lockdown, I came across a tenant who had been in the UK for 19 years, was from the EU, and he had just been denied a universal credit claim due to failing the habitual residency test because he had lost his retained worker status. So I knew that he needed to apply for this settlement scheme, but there was a language barrier and I wasn't registered with the OIC then. So I referred his family to Settled, who were able to talk them through applying. And once he got his settled status, we were able to apply for UC, and he was able to get an advance to clear his arrears.
Who is likely to need the most help to apply to the scheme, and why?
So we know that those people who are digitally excluded are likely to be elderly residents or people who do not have access to the internet. These people are likely to need help. There's also all the people who have a chaotic lifestyle, people who don't have evidence. For instance, they move a lot, so they don't necessarily have evidence of where they've been. People who don't have the right ID documents. All these people like fleeing domestic violence, care leavers in particular, people who are homeless. All these people are likely to really struggle to put together the information and to have the ID documents to be able to put an application through. We also know that there will be people who lack capacity to make an application. So people who have learning difficulties, mental health problems, people who have dementia. These people are likely to face real difficulties in putting an application through, and then to also prove their status once they get it. I would also say that from our tenants, the majority are likely to be okay, but it's those that are elderly, sick, those that have language problems and no family support, they're likely to need some help. Funnily enough, it's also the other side of the coin. So people who seem to be quite able, who are very engaged in their communities, who have been here a long time, those people might think that this doesn't apply to them and that they don't need to do anything. And I've had, for instance, a tenant who was convinced they didn't need to do anything because they have a permanent resident card. Now we know that these expire at the end of the year. I also find that people don't think that children need to make an application, and they do, because the application is not made when you make it for yourself, it's not included. Also, they tend to think that their children might be British because they were born in Britain. That's not the case necessarily. And also what I find is that because of COVID-19 and the fact that we've been in lockdown, a lot of people have not been able to renew their passports, or if they've had babies, they've not been able to request a passport. And for some nationalities, the process in itself is quite complicated. You need to go back to the country, etc. So some people will really have problems with that. And just one last, I think, set of people who are likely to have problems are those who have complex applications. So those who have a criminal background or have derivative rights, those ones will need to get support from a lawyer or somebody who has a higher level of qualification from the OIC than level 1.
Okay, so you just mentioned some support that's available, and we know that Settled provides immigration advice, and also housing associations can help their staff and residents. What other help is available for people who still need to apply?
The Home Office has funded NGOs like Settled to help those people who need help apply for the scheme. The list is on their website. We've also included a link on our briefing. As Settled, we can help housing association staff register with the OISC if they want to. And also, obviously, you can signpost your tenants to us, to our telephone helplines, as well as our Facebook forum. In terms of the applicants, if they have put in an application and they have questions, they can contact the EU Resolution Centre, who can provide information on where their application is at and what sort of information they need. They will not be able, however, to provide immigration advice. There are also some pro bono legal organisations like Help for Good, which provide help for those more complex applications that those who have a criminal background or those with derivative rights. We've also included the information in the briefing. From my experience, a lot of housing associations will already be working with these organizations because a lot of them tend to be citizen advice, law centers, charities that you tend to contact when you've got issues with your tenants and their benefits.
Thank you for that, and thanks for speaking to us today. I think this will be really, really valuable information for the National Housing Federation's members. And I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to add before we end the interview?
Just to say thank you for letting me talk about it, and I would just really encourage housing associations to engage with their EU employees and residents to make sure that they make the application by the deadline, because the impact of the non-application could be quite dramatic for the family and the person in question.
Thank you.